Okay, hi, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the latest version of the Blue Thread, Flowing Forward, Exploring 21st Century Water Solutions. So solutions, well, water problems, and we have many, need water solutions that I think are first and foremost sustainable. So sustainable is a word that we frequently hear, but quite often I get asked what is sustainable. And I think, is it green, is it cheap, long lasting, low maintenance, low energy, low carbon? And I guess it's all of those things, but I think first of all, any solution must work for the stakeholders. Solutions that don't work or that just cause other problems in the networks or in the treatment plants are not sustainable. And the stakeholders, there are many in the water sectors, customers, the environment, the regulators, the water companies, local authorities, and then all the users, schools, hospitals, etc. So that's the first thing, it must work. Secondly, it must be resilient. And I think by that I mean it must really work in multiple situations across multiple events and for many years. And also because it's in the environment, it's a constantly changing hostile environment, particularly with climate change. And it must also work with minimum intervention. So I think first we have it must work. Secondly, it must be resilient. And finally, of course, any solution must be affordable. And I think it must be good value for money for the people that are ultimately paid for, the customers. So I think we can all think of solutions that have been put in that probably they would have solved the problem, probably were resilient, but actually weren't affordable. And I think once you get those three things together, we then have a potential for actually solving some of the problems. But when you think about, those sort of different problems, I think some of them have been around for a long time. And today we're going to talk really about exploring 21st century water solutions. And we have three great speakers, and they're going to come at it from three different angles. So, but before I introduce them in the topic, I think we have some housekeeping. So, so all attendees' microphones are automatically muted throughout the webinar. However, we do want interaction, as you know. So anyone can post questions, and there's a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, and that's usually the best time for these webinars. So we have the usual format. We have three presentations, followed then by some discussion, and we'll see which threads we can pull out of it. And as many questions as possible will be answered. Those that can't be answered due to time, we will answer them afterwards. After the webinar, we will post answers to those questions. So please get involved and ask some questions. No question is too trivial. And shortly after the webinar, you will also receive a link to a short survey. And if you could take a few minutes to provide feedback, please, that would be really, really helpful so we can improve on future webinars. We're also interested in topics. If somebody wants to explore a topic, please let us know. And when we decide on the monthly topic for discussion on this webinar, we always look to educate and inform above everything else. Most importantly, this is not a sales webinar, and it is not meant to be an experts only space. So it's for everyone interested in the world of water. That includes those of us that work in the water sector, but also those that are just interested in water. Secondly, the topic, of course, must be interesting, and the speakers, and we're really, really privileged, I think, they should be interesting and knowledgeable about the subject, but also very engaging in the discussion. And I think that once again, we've managed to get three really, really good speakers, very knowledgeable experts in the field, but also very engaging and able to discuss across the topic. And when we think of 21st century water solutions, I think inevitably people's minds turn to new things, new gadgets, technology, better use of data, AI, real-time control, real-time interactions. And I think all of that is really important. But when we think of 21st century water problems and the ones that need solving, they're as old as civilization themselves. So the ones we're still solving are the same things, can be summarized as too much, flooding, too little, drought, and too dirty, pollution. And I think those are the topics that water engineers and society have been wrestling with as long as we've had towns. So really 21st century solutions, and I mean the good ones, they marry the old with the new to develop more effective and resilient answers to the age-old problems. And as I said, today we're going to explore three very different topics that will all be employed in the years to come in various guises and in various different places. And I think, first up, we're going to talk about something that's familiar to anybody who watches the news, and that's essentially about floods. How do we manage floods and flood risk? And I think today to discuss this, we're joined by Emily Clark. So can I move on? Can we move on the slides, please? Sir? Emily Clark. Emily is a principal flood and coast consultant at Binny's, and delighted to have you with us, Emily. So Emily is an experienced and chartered water and environmental manager, and she's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Water Engineers and Managers. She has over 11 years experience in the water industry, primarily in the flood risk management sector. And she's also worked in the Environment Agency, local flood authorities, Anglian Water and Water UK before landing in Binny's. And I think also, I know she's currently seconded to the Environment Agency as the strategic lead for the River Severn adaptation pathway and climate resilience strategy projects, and also to Anglian Water's Up One Alliance as its catchment and nature-based solutions lead. So I think, Emily, you're a very busy person, but also I think you have, you've also said that you're a passionate advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion, and you volunteer your time to promote better working practices. She helps raise awareness of gender inequity, hidden illnesses, and neurodiversity. So an awful lot to pack into a life there, Emily. So I'll leave it up to you, and we'll come back afterwards with a few questions. So Emily Clark, thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Hi everyone. So I plan to talk through an overview of how water from a flood risk perspective is managed in 21st century England, the current challenges, and some of the work being undertaken to shape the future of water management for generations to come. So to start off with, here are some of the key pieces of legislation covering flood risk management for England, which underpins every bit of work that we do within the sector. We have the Land Drainage Act of 1991, the 2009 Flood Risk Regs, and the Flood and Water Management Act of 2010. I won't go into details of these as it would make for a really dry presentation. That's absolutely not what we want. I will, however, go through some of the statistics that describe the risk of flooding in England. So the Environment Agency estimates that over 5 million people and 5.9 million households and businesses in England are at risk of flooding, and that's 1 in 6 properties. Surface water remains the highest source of flood risk for people and property in the UK, with 3.2 million properties at risk of surface water flooding, compared to 2.7 million at risk of flooding from rivers and the sea. And around 500,000 or 20% of these properties are at risk of both sources of flooding. Additionally, up to 290,000 properties are at risk of groundwater flooding, and a further 700 properties and approximately 1.8 thousand kilometres of the English coastline is at risk of erosion. So the UK National Flood Resilience Review found that over 55% of water and sewerage pumping stations, 41% of transport and utility infrastructure, 28% of gas infrastructure, 20% of railway lines, 14% of electricity substations, and 10% of major roads are in areas at risk of flooding. And over 2/3 of properties in England are served by infrastructure sites and networks located in or dependent on others in areas at risk of flooding. So just to put it into context, flooding costs the UK economy around £100,000 per hour per major road affected at peak traffic times. The Environment Agency have reported that the number of people at risk of flooding will double by 2050. And if you're not directly affected by this flooding, you will be indirectly affected by roads being flooded or businesses, schools, hospitals, and other critical infrastructure being flooded. Shockingly, only 34% of people in flood risk areas believe their property is at flood risk. And currently, the average household in the UK is more likely to be flooded than burgled. So following the major flooding in 2007 in England, Sir Michael Pitt was tasked to undertake a review, and his findings were the foundation of the Flood and Water Management Bill, which was then enacted in 2010. This diagram was put together by colleagues at Southern Water to try and explain to their customers the very complex myriad of authorities that have responsibilities for flood risk management in England. So these are the Environment Agency, who have the main operational responsibility for and permissive powers to manage flood risk from main rivers, reservoirs, estuaries and the sea. And the Environment Agency also have the strategic overview of all sources of flooding. Lead local flood authorities are responsible for managing flooding from ordinary watercourses, surface and groundwater. Water and sewerage companies have a duty to effectually drain areas within their responsibility, and they are responsible for managing risk from flooding from all types of public sewer, including foul, combined and surface water, as well as burst water mains. Internal drainage boards are responsible for managing flooding from ordinary watercourses within their districts, and they play an important role in water level management in their areas and asset operation and maintenance. And then finally, highways authorities are responsible for managing surface water flooding, including all adopted highway sewers and associated assets. And these organisations are collectively known as risk management authorities. So how is flood risk management funded? In short, it's a complex myriad of funding sources from different branches of water companies and other private sources. In 2011, government introduced a new partnership funding policy, which essentially states that government can no longer fully fund flood risk management. The policy requires the risk management authorities to actively seek partnership funding from the beneficiaries of flood risk management schemes. These beneficiaries can range from the flood risk management authorities themselves to organisations and landowners whose property will benefit from a reduction in flood risk when the scheme is completed. And the idea is that the government funding can therefore be spread more widely and therefore help more communities. To cover a little bit about the regulation of water in England, I'll briefly cover what this means for water and sewage companies. So as I mentioned, water companies are designated as a risk management authority, but they also have many other duties and responsibilities beyond flood risk management. They are a regulated industry, and one of the main regulators is Ofwat. Ofwat essentially reviews the business plans of each water company and critiques whether they fit in with their expectations and the expectations of our government. They have the power to decide how much water companies can charge customers and how they can spend that funding. As well as the 5-year business plans referred to as AMPs, water companies also have longer term plans over 25 years. I've included on the right here Anglian's business plan and their 25-year strategic direction statement on the right. And Anglian has made bold long-term ambitions in these plans, aiming to make the east of England more resilient to both the risk of drought and flooding. So I wanted to end my presentation with saying why I love working in this sector, and I hope to inspire others to come and join our amazing industry, whether that's people straight from school, university, or career changes. There are loads of amazing opportunities from apprenticeships and graduate schemes to many more advanced roles that are vacant at present, seeking individuals with transferable skills and an appetite to help improve our environment and. So why do I love my role? The pictures, these are all me, and the pictures on the left is me graduating from a geography and geology degree, where I got to take part in amazing field work, which is the second picture, up in the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, and also down on the south coast of England, along the Jurassic Coast, which is still one of my favourite places to visit. The last two pictures are during my 11-year to date career, where I've had the pleasure, as Mark said earlier, of working for the Environment Agency, Cambridgeshire's lead local flood authority, and Anglian Water. I currently work for Binnie's Consultancy, which is an RSK company, where I'm seconded back into both the Environment Agency and Anglian Water, working on 2 different roles and 2 different projects. So I'll briefly just cover what they entail now. So for the Environment Agency, I've been working as the strategic lead for the River Severn Climate Resilience and Adaptation Pathways project. In this role, our project team have been working with our stakeholders and communities in the River Severn catchment to look at today's risk and how climate change will affect the catchment to the year 2100 and beyond. We're currently working with our partners to plan how we can better work together to ensure that the policies we make and the actions that we take will help us to adapt to the changing climate. For Anglian Water, I'm the Catchment and Nature-Based Solutions Lead. This is a new role that I started last month, and I'll be working with internal and external stakeholders to prioritise catchment and nature-based solutions as business as usual for our upcoming capital delivery programme. The next 5-year business plan is near double the 2020 to 2025 business plan that we're in at the moment, and I'll be working with my colleagues to ensure that we're prioritising environmental solutions alongside many other aspects of work, including reducing carbon and pollutions. We recognise that we need to be looking at water at the wider catchment scale to address issues like flooding, pollution and water resources. And the industry also recognises that we need to move from grey to green, so moving away from relying solely on carbon-intensive grey infrastructure, including concrete and pumping solutions, moving to more sustainable infrastructure, including nature-based solutions like treatment wetlands and natural flood management techniques. Green infrastructure isn't exactly new, but there are lots of exciting innovations in this area, and we're learning more about the multi-benefits of these solutions all of the time. There will be a huge increase in nature-based solutions across AMP8, which is 2025 to 2030, and then even more great work is planned for AMP8 and beyond, AMP9 and beyond, sorry, which is from 2030. So although the water industry is under heavy criticism in the media at the moment, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of amazing people working to improve the environment to leave it in a better state than we've inherited. And I'm really proud to be playing a small part in this. I truly believe this is the most exciting sector to work for because the possibilities and opportunities are endless. And the people I work with across this sector are the ones who are finding solutions to the complex environmental challenges the world is facing. And together we're working on tackling the dual challenges of climate change and the ecological emergency. I hope this inspires you to join our sector if you're not already in it and play your part in shaping our planet's future. Thank you for listening.
Right, Emily, thank you very much. It's really good to hear somebody speak really positively about the water sector, because we are getting a bit of a hammering at the moment, aren't we? But I do agree with you. You know, I've worked in this a lot longer than you, and everybody I've ever met has been very passionate about what they do, fixing things. And unfortunately, I think perhaps we've been let down in some ways with the politics of the sector. But anyway, we leave that for a different day. I'm really interested in the whole idea of flood management in the catchment, yeah, and I think the work that you're doing in Anglian Water, does that also involve water resources, usage of water, the demand side rather than the supply side, because we talk a lot about supply side and managing. What about usage, how people use water, and maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that.
So my career at the moment has mainly focused within flood risk management, as I've just talked through, but people do regularly comment that flooding and drought are two sides of the same coin. I also often point out that you can be in a period of drought and still have major flooding, which seems kind of counterintuitive, but it can and does happen, and that's only going to increase as our climate further changes. I believe that people working in flood risk management and water resources need to work more closely together and share the resources. So that includes like skills as well as funding, so that we can tackle these challenges collaboratively. If you think about some of the kind of flood risk management schemes that we're seeing being built across the UK, things like schemes that are designed to hold water back in the upper parts of the catchment, so that reduces flood risk downstream. That water being held back could be used for other sources, and that could be used for water resources, not in all cases, but in some cases. And then that water can be used for things like water consumption. And I love learning, so I really like keeping up to date with kind of wider water awareness. So I'm always kind of really interested in what my colleagues are doing in water resources and water quality, because I do think that we need to look at it more holistically and work together to, like I say, share the resources and share the funding, share the skills, and tackle these issues together.
So one of your slides there actually showed that one of the issues, I believe, is just the lack of structure. I think the funding comes from so many different places, and sometimes just getting your arms around a solution, which by definition is a broad area geographically, and then trying to say we need a bit here and a bit there and a bit of funding here from there, it makes it much more complicated. And everything sort of takes a long time. So I think in terms of, you know, if you could wave a magic wand, what would be the one thing that you could say could really help us in our flood risk management in this country?
So as you say, you've been in this sector longer than me, so you probably were around when the sector operated differently. In my time within flood risk management, it has kind of compartmentalized following the Flood and Water Management Act, and there was really important reasons for doing that, because prior to that, things like surface water wasn't being adequately addressed by authorities. There was no clear responsibility for a designated organisation to take responsibility for that. And so the Flood and Water Management Act really helped with that, and importantly, it brought those decisions and powers to a local area. However, what it means is that, you know, as we know, water doesn't care where it lands. It doesn't respect, you know, political boundaries, anything like that. And so where we have kind of separated all of these different organisations, we have by accident kind of introduced a bit of siloed working and siloed thinking. So in my previous role at Anglian Water, I worked really hard to bring all of those organisations together. So we were constantly in communication, constantly working together to look for solutions. So that would be my magic wand, just us all working more collaboratively together, understanding our roles and responsibilities and remits and pressures, and then trying to align timescales. So I mentioned timescales a minute ago. So water companies, for example, plan in 5-year business cycles, whereas the capital funding for flood risk management from the government is in 6-year cycles. So we're kind of out of sync with that, which can make it quite difficult when you're trying to do a scheme that, as you say, wants to take a bit of funding from here, a bit of funding from there. If we could sort that out, I think we'd get a lot more, we'd make huge advancements in being able to deliver better schemes for our environment and our communities. So that'd be my wish.
Fantastic. I hope you get it sometime soon, Emily. Right. Thank you very much. So we're going to move on to our second speaker now. So and it's Lynn Hodge, and I mean, Emily in her speech, in her presentation, mentioned nature-based solutions, and Lynn is going to talk to us about nature-based solutions. And again, Lynn, you're like me, you've got more experience than Emily. I won't say how many years, that would be rude. But essentially, Lynn has worked she works with NWH Treatment, which is probably the largest non-infrastructure contractor in the water sector. Design and build, and I think as a process engineer, she works very closely with designers and other engineering disciplines to produce, and this is the important bit, things that can be built, process deliverables, from piping and instrumentation diagrams and control philosophies through all the way to hydraulic design. But there's a change coming, isn't there, really, Lynn? And it's going to go from grey to green. And I think what's really interesting for me is everyone's talking about nature-based solutions as if it's the next panacea, the next silver bullet. And I'd be really interested in hear what you're going to tell us about that. But I think you've also been working recently on phosphorus removal schemes, and you're interested in the use of more sustainable natural treatment processes. So it fits very well into this area, and I think it's interesting because 21st century shiny, I said, but actually nature-based solutions is where it sort of all comes from in the first instance. So anyway, over to you, Lynn. Really looking forward to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi everyone, so I'm going to be discussing a scheme that we did with United Utilities up in Cumbria. It's called Southwaite. Let me just get my slides to move forward. Oh, thank you. So Southwaite is a small village in Cumbria, just south of Carlisle. It treats a population of 140 plus the effluent from the local service station on the M6. The existing sewage works had aged assets. They were hydraulically overloaded due to climate change and growth in the catchment. And so part of the AMP7 WINIP objective, as well as the good watercourse status, there was a phosphate permit on the works. So it really required a construction of a new works. As you can see, the existing works diagonally cuts across the site. The site's bounded on 3 sides by tree lines and on the 4th side by the West Coast main line. So there was constraints around what we could do. The project design requirements showed that the works takes a dry weather flow of 1 litre per second up to a peak storm event of 6 litres a second. So that gives us a major challenge for not only the treatment of the biological loads, but also hydraulically managing that massive turn down in flow rate. So the solution was to treat up to 11 litres a second through a conventional treatment works, and to treat the remaining up to 15 litres a second via a storm management system. So the initial conventional grey solution was for a treatment works with 2 streams, which included primary settlement tanks, SAF for biological treatment, humus tanks, and associated storm sludge storage and chemical dosing to achieve the phosphate permit. That was going to treat the 11 litres a second, and for the remaining storm flow we were looking at a large detention tank, 850 metres cubed, that was going to be buried. So obviously, you know, as a grey solution, that has a massive high carbon impact. The construction of the tank, the depth of the tank means you've got a high head of pumping back to the works when we're returning the storm flows. The other, just the general issues around this method of storing stormwater means that, you know, for prolonged rainfall events, you might fill your tank and not have the ability to return it back through the works. So you then do have surcharging in the network. Depending on how long the dry weather period is, you might not be able to return the tank contents within the 24 hours that we really aim to do that. That leads to septicity problems. So there was lots of issues around this solution. Construction locally to the West Coast main line, the need to sort of enter such a deep tank for maintenance conditions. There was a lot of issues. So United Utilities and Advanced Plus decided to put a hold on the design, and they went away and looked at nature-based solutions. So various solutions were considered, and the integrated constructed wetland was deemed to be the lowest TOTEX, best fit for low carbon. It allowed the biodiversity solution, and also with it, the integrated constructed wetland means that there is the chance for the general public to make use of that area as well. So as part of the nature-based solutions, the AEA were engaged, and they allowed us to look at an operating techniques agreement, which I'll come on to later. So the solution was for a hybrid design with the 11 litres a second going through a more conventional treatment stage, and the remaining flow passing through the inlet works, so screen, grit removal, and then overflowing to the storm diversion chamber and through the integrated wetland. Part of this is data gathering, which I think is going to be massive going forward, understanding how often it spills, what sort of load is going onto the wetland, and obviously understanding the treatment process that provides. Because of the need to maintain flow going through this, there is a recirculation of final effluent, and that is brought in when there is no overflow from the storm chamber. So this side stream is the first of its kind for United Utilities. We managed, as you can see, to squeeze 3 ponds in between the existing treatment works, which was kept online while the new works was being constructed, and the West Coast main line. The ponds themselves have got a geotextile liner. A lot of the time there aren't liners, but due to, again, to the proximity of the railway line, we thought it was a good solution to make sure that we didn't undermine the railway line. The flow passes through each pond in turn. The hydraulics of the works were suitable to allow us to pass through from one to the other. So you can see the 3 ponds there. The ponds have different plants in each one. We were lucky enough that we could grow the plants in a nursery over the winter period, so that they were well established when they were brought to site for the construction of the ponds. So the ponds are 500 millimetres deep. There's 300 millimetres of soil, and that was the reclaimed soil that was part of the construction of the conventional treatment works, and then 200 millimetres of water. So, like I say, there's a diversity of plants across the 3 ponds. The first pond has more reeds, rushes, things that are more resilient, suitable for the incoming storm wastewater. And then across the second 2 ponds, the reeds and rushes are thinned out and a more diverse plant species were put in. And so you can see this is sort of 3 months later after the initial planting. You can see how well it's starting to establish. There are inter-pond cascades, there's walkways and viewing points. It's been attached to the local footpaths so that the population, people can walk around and make the most of it. There is wildlife now visiting the area. So I was saying, the way that it's constructed, I shall actually just go back a bit. So the incoming flow to the works is obviously monitored. The outfall is monitored for the permit, but the pond and storm flow is monitored separately. That isn't part of the permit, and this is where the operating techniques agreement comes in. So the EA have given United Utilities a 3-year operating techniques agreement, and that means that the effluent from the storm system is monitored, but there is no risk to United Utilities that they can fail a permit, and it just gives people, like water companies, lots of time to monitor, data gather, to see how these ponds are going to perform. So this is a small works. The ponds are quite large. That's going to be one of the challenges going forward, is finding the land available to install the ponds. And I think this is part of what we need to understand, which works are suitable for this solution. The South Weight itself is also what's called a treat or flow works. So that means that you can't have a storm overflow from the works. So all the flow has to be treated, which was why the initial grey solution was to store the storm flow and return it back through the works. So this is a good solution again for treat or flow works, where there's just such a big range of flows that come through the works that need to be treated. So benefits and challenges, I think I've probably captured quite a lot of those already. The benefits obviously is the low carbon solution. There's the reduced concrete for construction, the reduced power required for pumping large volumes of storm storage back through the works, the benefits of the biodiversity, promoting the social well-being, the fact that it is available there for the local people to walk around to enjoy. Flood management, like I say, it fits in perfectly with the previous presentation. The challenges are the early engagement with the water companies and the regulator because of the need to have the operating techniques agreements in place, which allows us to build these nature-based solutions and to get the data gathered early to understand the performance and how these are going to help going forward for storm storage on the works, but also for CSOs in the catchments. Yeah, it is just, it's a good solution going forward, and it's just hopefully the water companies and the regulators will be able to make this work. So that's, yeah.
Okay, fantastic, Lynn. I mean, two or three things strike me immediately listening to that. One is it's complicated. It's one tends to walk past a reed bed or something, and you think, oh well, they're just chucking it into there. So I think the amount of engineering design, I think, is really interesting. And there's some real challenges there for the industry, as you've pointed out. 140 people is the population equivalent for that. I know it has the M6 services as well. But if you were to do that in an urban environment with a 500,000 population plant,
yes,
that would be a major investment in land, even if we had the land. And I think the second thing that comes with that is the uncertainty around, the uncertainty around what's the effluent from the plant. So the operating techniques agreement. But given that, I think it shows real change, I think, from the old sort of pipe it, pump it, treat it, discharge it. But do you think, I think we have time for just one quick question, really, but do you think the recent news coverage, not always positive, of recent sewage spills, do you think that'll help us in sort of moving forward, constructing more nature-based solutions?
I think obviously the water authorities have the water companies, only have so much money, and obviously going for, I don't know, easier solutions is of storage and pumping is an understandable one. It's one that's been well used. So I think this coverage might just spur them into action to look at something that can give them a good news story back. Like I say, looking at the pictures of the wetlands there, it looks amazing, doesn't it? And I think they need to be looking at good news stories and things that can bring in an environmental impact, a positive environmental impact, positive social impact. Hopefully, is something that they might look at doing for the good news story as well as for the.
I think another challenge, actually, just thinking about that, actually, is we're going to have to open our worlds to the public, aren't we? Nobody wants to go for a picnic by the side of a sewage works, but I think, by large wetlands, I think it's going to be a really nice place, and how we interact through the communities and that is going to be really interesting going forward.
And that's it, and understanding that, because this is going to be the challenge going forward, finding land, like say, it's going to be a lot of land required, and if the public perception is that the land is going to be used for sewage treatment, that's not necessarily a good sell, like you say, but if they can understand the environmental impacts too, and the benefits, hopefully that would help.
Okay, right, Lynn. Thank you very much indeed. Really interesting. And I think we're just going to move on now to our third speaker, which is Alistair Mosley. A lot of you will know Alistair. He's a man of many hats. Past president, honorary vice president of Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Management, president in 2008. You must have been a child, Alistair, when you were the president in 2008. You're also a fellow director of mine on the Future Water Association, and you lead the Innovation Steering Group, which aims to stimulate innovation capability within the water industry supply chain. And something that's really interesting is the whole world of water dragons and young water dragons competitions that Alistair has led. Regular commentator on the champion of solutions to water management and water skills, and instrumental in setting up and setting in motion the UK Junior Water Prize, again back in 2009. And also, in the spare time, Alistair appointed as the water sector technical expert for the Department for International Trade, in addition to your role as a technical expert on river diversions for the Systra and Mott MacDonald Design joint venture, which is the Midland section of the new HS2 railway, which now stops in the Midlands, I believe. And you're also, I know Alistair many years, he's also a very accomplished concert pianist. I'm never sure where you fit in the practice in your busy life. And what you're going to talk about is really take us through the world of water sector technology, innovation, and most importantly, implementation. So we're going from floods through nature-based solutions to technological innovations. And at times, as you well know, it can be frustratingly slow, but effective. So Alistair, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. That's a lovely introduction. Much appreciated. Yeah, I think we're all busy. I think you heard from Emily and Lynn. We all. I think it's just the fact you get passionate in this industry about wanting to do things. I think it's a great community, as well as being a fantastic thing, doing the good things for water. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about innovation, some of the innovation things that are going on. I'm going to talk mainly around my perspective of it through a competition that Future Water Association runs, which is called Water Dragons, and you're going to see that on some of the slides, hopefully, if they will move forward. Oh, it's not going. Anybody want to help? I'll keep talking until somebody helps fix it. Won't go. So yeah, so Water Dragons competition, it's an opportunity for companies to showcase what they do, and this, when I say water companies, I mean businesses working in the water company supply chain, which there we go, it's working now, fantastic. And I shall be dipping into what some of the projects that we've seen over the last few years on that. So innovation obviously is a big part of transforming what we do in the sector, and core to what the innovations that we're really seeing now is green aspects. So a lot of what we've seen today from Emily and Lynn actually is encapsulated in many of the innovations that we've seen. So what I thought I'd do is quickly capture some of the areas that we've of the competitors that we had in the last couple of years. Probably the most prominent one that we see is through innovations in digital applications. So as we all know, having data is a really important part of the way we understand how our systems are working, our water treatment and our wastewater treatment systems are working, but also the ability to actually analyze that data. So we've been seeing an awful lot of things through digital tools to manage water supply and scarcity. A few sort of call outs I'll give there is one that won actually this year, called Aquascope, which is very much in its infancy, but very interesting technology using digital twin technology and artificial intelligence, and obviously using a lot of satellite imagery as well as drone imagery, and real opportunities to simulate how our landscape performs when it's under stress from pollution, water degradation and flood risks. So it covers all three areas, and it's a really powerful tool, and I remember the judges being quite blown away by what it was able to do, and we could really transform. So we're actually able to create a computer visualization of a catchment and then how we can then manipulate it. It's going to be really important in nature-based solutions going forward. Looking at our sort of pipeline and digital side, that sort of overlaps with finding and fixing leaks. We have technologies such as Avaro and their Enigma leak detection, which is a real combination of using acoustics and also statistical data from how the water loss is happening in the area. We've got companies like Nevis who have got really specialized flow measurement technology now, so we're going to get a really good understanding not only of flow measurement in pipes but also in rivers. And one of Nevis's innovations was how can you measure low flows in rivers, which has always been a big challenge, and that really captured the Environment Agency judge on that panel. Looking at efficient water treatment techniques, that's a very popular one. We see innovations coming there. So some ones that have caught my imagination recently have been better use of aeration techniques, getting more value out of the air. One of the biggest challenges I didn't realize is when you're aerating an activated sludge tank, 95% of the oxygen that's put into the tank is lost to the atmosphere. So we had a technology here which utilised 95% of the oxygen. So that could be a game changer going forward. Also, technologies that are really understanding how membranes work. And we went into the world of physics and chemistry and understanding electrostatic charge on particular chemicals that have a big impact on how well a membrane actually works. So that was quite eye-opening for me. Circular economy is something that's really coming through now. A lot of water companies now are targeting 100% recycling of all wastewater that goes into the works. So it's not only harvesting all of the water, but actually harvesting all of the materials that go through it. And we've been seeing a lot of innovations there. I'm going to put a shout out here for Severn Trent, who I also work for, which Mark didn't mention. They have a big works up at Strongford, that serves Stoke-on-Trent, and they are turning that into the world's first 100% recycling works, including capturing all of the cellulose that comes in through the toilet paper at the inlets. So some fantastic technologies there. They're going to be having a big launch in June and July, so watch out for things on the internet. And I know Future Water itself will be promoting those exhibitions when they come through. I was very intrigued with Lynn's reed bed technology there, and a technology that we saw very recently, actually from a Canadian company. It's called Avidos. One of the problems with reed beds is they do need maintenance, so they're fine for about 5 to 8 years, and then very often the substrate needs to be cleaned. And this company Avidos have come up with a really, really innovative way of cleaning the substrate where it gets 100% recycled, and you can capture all of the pollutants that are in there. One of the things that gets harvested, particularly into reed beds, is the metals that are prevalent in the wastewater. So Lynn, I can introduce you to Avidos if you're interested, if you want to look at that with the United Utilities going forward. So I think I've rambled a fair bit there, but what I wanted to show really is that we've got 9 particular focus areas for innovation. It's very exciting what's coming through, and underpinning all of this is this big focus now on natural capital and ecosystem services, which is going to be a big part of nature-based solutions going forward. What natural capital and ecosystem services do is they can put a monetary value that investors can rely on the green technologies that we're putting forward, which will really help underpin the sort of investment that we're going to see in the sector going forward into AMP8 and AMP9. So Emily was there talking about, the investments happening in AMP9. It's very important that we're able to show the economic value of what we're bringing in these technologies. Now, just before I go on to the next slide, I think we're doing okay for time. Let's just tell you a little bit about Water Dragons and what it is. You probably thought, well, what's all that about? Well, Water Dragons is based on the Dragon's Den competition that BBC obviously have made to great use over the last few years. So it's the same format with companies coming in pitching their innovations or their businesses to a team of experts who are, and obviously in the case of the BBC Dragons, they've actually got little piles of cash next to them. We don't quite work like that with Water Dragons. What we have is a panel of experts drawn from right across the industry, very senior level people that see a lot of innovation, who are then able to decide whether they think these innovations are actually going to have some real impact, and if they are, to then try and encourage the take-up within the sector. So it's a very visible way of promoting innovations to become very popular. We've probably had between 300 and 400 innovations in the last 10 years come through this competition. We don't give money, we give visibility, and nearly all of the innovations that get through, even the ones that don't win, get taken up in one way or the other through the sector. So we think we're doing our bit as a trade association to really try and promote sort of the new innovations that are happening. And we run it on a regional basis, so we run 3 or 4 competitions throughout the year. Then we have a big final with an after-dinner event, which is obviously after competition event. The last 2 have been hosted by the Canadian High Commission. As part of an ongoing relationship we have with them. I'm happy to share all that information, or I'm sure if you just go onto the Future Water Association website, and the address is just there, go and have a look and see what we do. Right, so without rambling for any more, one of the things we look for on the competition is to make sure that the innovations have got some proper provenance, if you like, so they're not just fly-by-night people coming in. The one thing we do have to keep an eye on is where they are in terms of technology readiness. There's a technology readiness scale, which some of you may be aware of, which goes from 1 to 9. 1 is concept stage, not proven. 9 is actually out in the marketplace and being used. we tend to see innovations through Dragons around the 7 to 9 level, but we do stimulate some that are earlier, and Aquascope was one of those. Aquascope was within the 1 to 4, where it was still really being proven, but the technology that they were using was clearly very robust. So for innovation to be worthwhile, it's got to have a good driver, clear drivers, good reasons for existing, why is it needed. It needs to identify who the key players are. I think Emily mentioned stakeholders earlier on, and particularly for nature-based solutions, just getting the stakeholders engaged is really important. There must be defined challenges supported by the drivers. So it's all very well to say, yes, we need to stop leakage, but we need to know what the drivers are. Well, the drivers are understanding how it's happening, being able to identify where it is, find technology that we can use to actually stop it happening. There needs to be a good underpinning provenance from research and development. Sometimes that's a term that's been forgotten a lot in innovation, R&D, research and development, very, very important. Often starts or has its roots in academia. So the roles of the universities in this country are huge. Many, many of our universities are world leading in terms of academic provenance and research of the papers that they write. So we often look to see them, make sure that there's that kind of linkage there. There has to be a good innovator or entrepreneur in there, somebody that's got the vision, knows how to make it work. And of course, without the money, the investor, be that a venture capitalist or an angel that's putting some money in, then these things are never going to go off the ground. So it's really important that we do that. Now, around that, we have to have good project management, and there has to be a good business case. So the Dragons competition is looking for all of those. Now, underpinning all of this is you do need some sort of stimulant. And that stimulant can come in many ways. It can come through innovation funds. Obviously, we've got the UK Innovation Fund, which is very, very, very well known. We've got the drivers from the water industry, where they're prepared to do pilot projects where they're convinced about an innovation. There are competitions. There's competitions like Dragons, where we're giving them an opportunity to showcase, but then there are also innovation funding competitions, and that's where Ofwat has really put its money where its mouth is, and it launched the Innovation Challenge Fund for AMP7, and it's doubling that fund to £400 million for AMP8. There is some scepticism as to whether that is a game changer or not, but I think the fact that the regulators put their money where their mouth is enough to say to the industry, look, we are committed here to trying to get the best new technology and services that we possibly can into this sector to make it work really well. Showcasing is obviously really important. If you don't know about it, you're not going to use it. Events like today, this webinar, thank you so much for inviting me to join, are a key part of showcasing the great things that are happening in the sector. And I do think that the Future Water Dragons has really helped that as well. And one thing I've omitted to mention so far is the sort of intellectual property side and the patenting of innovations. And one thing that Future Water has started to do is to really look at the patenting of technologies and to put a bit of stimulus in to say to companies, if you're going to invent something, you're going to bring something new to the market, make sure you've patented it so it can't get copied. It also gives it a greater provenance in terms of the investor. Investors have more confidence in innovations that have a patent. Patenting process is itself quite difficult. It can be quite expensive, but I think most companies that do patent what they do see the benefits in terms of protecting their IP in the future and also getting that bit of visibility through the sector. So I've talked a little bit about Future Water Dragons as a stimulus. Let's just move now on to some of the things I've seen through the competition. One thing I'm quite passionate about is that innovations in their own rarely have impact. They do need to be working in collaboration with others to have some real impact. Some of the great technologies we have, like our phones, are collaborations and combinations of technologies. And we're beginning to do our bits to try and identify some of those collaborations and then to try and join people up to get them talking to each other. The Water Energy Nexus is a really good one because clearly a lot of water treatment works generate a lot of power, a lot of gas, a lot of energy, and that's a good example of how the water industry and the power generation and renewable energies are really beginning to merge here. So these 100% recycling works I've talked about are also mini power stations in a way. They're generating power for the local communities that they're in. And innovation isn't just about the technology, it's also about how we use the services and the skills, about bringing people together. So I'm going to conclude on my slide here by just saying collaboration, to my mind, is the next big thing that we've got to try and achieve in innovation, and I'm hoping that the innovation funds like Ofwat will be thinking in a similar vein. So thank you for listening.
No, thank you very much, Alistair. I think there's so much stuff and so much passion. Maybe I could ask Lynn and Emily to join us here actually for the last couple of minutes. I think we've heard quite a lot, over the last hour or so. We've heard from a consultant, we've heard from a contractor, now from yourself, Alistair, as an innovator, I guess, as a primer of innovation. But what's fairly obvious is the water sector is changing quite dramatically. And I think I was reading something the other day on the BBC about sponge cities and bounty cities, and so we get from capture, transport, treat to actually treat in the community, and something Lynn was talking quite a lot about. I mean, where do you sit in this, Alistair, in terms of the industry being able to pivot, not quite 180 degrees, but certainly 90 degrees from this to this, and double in size at the same time in the next 5 to 6 years? Where do you see the main challenges there are?
Well, actually, funny, if I can draw back onto one of my home institutions, the Institute of Civil Engineers, has a magazine called NCE, and there was a very interesting article, actually from the power sector in there, about how, because the power sector has got an equal challenge, they're trying to put in a new power grid. And the one challenge they've observed is you ain't going to do this unless you properly engage with communities. So it's community engagement. I actually see nature-based solutions as being a real help for that, because as soon as people can see that our water catchment is actually in nature and brought together, which people seem to have a great relationship to, they want to go and swim in it now and enjoy it and love it. That's a great opportunity for the water companies to bring communities on board. And I think the more engagement we have with communities, the water companies will then learn how important that is. You cannot look at your water assets in isolation. They are embedded in the community. So it has to be to do that 90-degree swerve you were just indicating there, it's got to be done with bringing the public on board. That's come through education. One of the reasons I was quite passionate about the Junior Water Prize was it was getting young people to understand water systems. They educate their parents, and then before you know it, we start to get a community going where people understand and care. One of the things that links you, me, Emily and Lynn together is we're all passionate because we all know how important water is to society. That's what really drives us. The public know that as well, and I think as soon as we get everybody to really understand the whole scheme of things, we'll then start to get the community public on board, and we'll be able to do greater and more exciting things.
Yeah, I think maybe Emily, you might have a comment. We have over the years really sort of done things to the communities rather than with the communities at times, and I think now the technologies we're talking about is more with the community. Certainly catchment-based management started with catchment-sensitive farming and expanded from there. And I think do you have some thoughts about that? Or are we going in the right directions? Does this feel the right thing to do from your point of view, Emily, where you're sitting?
Yeah, definitely. We should always be engaging with the communities. I think it can be quite tricky because you don't want to go to the communities before you've kind of got an idea of what you can do, what funding is available, but equally you definitely don't want to go to the communities and say, hey, this is what we're doing, what do you think? Because we want to be taking the communities along the journey with us, because at the end of the day, the people that live in those local areas know that area the best. We are experts in our field of flood risk management, whatever it is, water engineering, but they know their local catchments far better than we will ever be able to. So we need to engage with them to learn from them and design solutions that will work best for them as well. So yeah, it's always a tricky one. How early do you go to communities? One thing I've been doing, I haven't been doing, sorry, the project team's been doing as part of the Environment Agency Adaptation Pathways work, is we've been doing some citizen panels. So what we did was we wrote to the communities in the River Severn catchment and said, would you like to be part of the citizen panels, and ask people to apply. And then a company helped set up a panel to make sure that it was kind of diverse in terms of geography, background, age range, all of those kind of things. And we talked to them about the plans that we had, because we're thinking really long term, like I said earlier, to the year 2100 and beyond. And we were talking to them about how the catchment is going to change, how the how climate change is going to impact the catchment over that time, and talking to them about what sorts of things that they think that we should be prioritising. And that's been so invaluable, and we've had some really great discussions from the local communities, and that's enabled us to kind of get the messages out about what's going to be happening in their catchment, but also get the messages in to our project team about what we need to be looking out for. So definitely always need to be engaging with our communities.
And I guess, Lynn, as well, just to wrap up now, I think essentially you emphasised the need for early engagement, didn't you? We're not just with the water company, but also with the communities. And I guess ultimately, if we are going to be inviting families to our sewage works or reed beds for their family picnic, it has to be better than what they currently look like, doesn't it? Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, for the I guess one of the things I probably missed from saying was it is for the smaller works where, you know, the return of storm flows is so much harder on those smaller works than on the larger ones, and that's where it does work better. But we do need to have those more relaxed consents and allow time for data gathering and just to take this forward.
Well, I'm afraid we're a couple of minutes over, but it's been really, really fascinating. And I just wanted to thank the three of you. So Emily, Lynn, Alistair. We could talk about any one of those subjects for ages and ages and ages, and I hope we come back to them. But I'm just going to have to say thank you very much. The next webinar is going to be really exciting. It's going to be during Singapore International Water Week in a couple of weeks' time. So I'll be coming to you from Singapore. But from now, and thank you very much. Thanks to our contributors, and thank you to everyone who attended. See you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.